The house I grew up in was always creepy. Even having lived in it for my entire life, it still was unsettling. The classic Victorian architecture mixed with the dark academia decor always seemed wrong, like two puzzle pieces fit together making the wrong image. As children, we thought nothing of it, but when we started to realize how unsettling it was, then we began to laugh at our own mind-made fears. My brother and I would always joke about the zombies in the basement or the ghosts upstairs. Sometimes we would even swear we had heard screaming. At first we thought it was childish banter that would fade as we realized what really was happening, but an explanation never came. So even as teenagers, we were hesitant to go anywhere without each other. It didn't help that the lights flickered as if it were a bad rave, or that the walls had a tendency to be too weak to hold paintings, causing them to fall randomly. But the worst was the groans and creaks of the house sounding like the gates of hell opening up to swallow us whole. I first thought that it was the house settling after all. It was ancient, though the pieces never fit firmly, because a setting house doesn't equate to long, claw-like tears in the wallpaper, of pictures torn from the frame while it still hangs on the wall. Though we felt invincible, two teens back to back while fighting against the world. Even as children, we stayed back to back, eyes wide open at every flicker, noise, or shudder. We were prepared to fight and win, but we never were ready to lose. We played games while we would sit on his bed telling stories about how we would defend ourselves from the big bad monsters, always swearing to stay together and use teamwork to defeat the evil that lurked below. We never liked being alone, but now I had to be. It was sudden, his death, an accident causing another, causing another, causing another. I never knew that humans had that much blood inside of them, but now I wish I didn't. Even though the floors had long since been cleaned from the blood splatters, the smell of iron and the sticky warm fluid still seemed to be stained in my mind. Being alone in the house felt terribly surreal. I always tricked myself into believing I was still safe because he was right in front of me, his form clear and flickering, but I knew it was wrong. I knew my mind was tricking me into feeling comfortable so I don't have to face the truth. I couldn't not be alone in the house because he was all I had. The fact that I was, nor totally and completely alone, seemed terrifying. Sometimes I swear I can still hear him screaming while the garbage disposal runs, clunking with every failed attempt to slice the bones of his hand. Sometimes I feel happy with the hallucinations because he was alive, and could be saved now that I know the outcome. But his screams always make me realize it will end the same. The house only seemed worse after it. Every flicker of light caused my heart to stop, and with them happening more, it was a miracle my heart hadn't exploded. The falling paintings seemed more violent as they shattered and flew across the room in their downward tumble, and the creaking didn't sound like wood anymore. It sounded like deep gurgling moans of my brother. I tried and convinced myself it wasn't real, and that tea was a trick of the light, or my mind playing games, but his screams were real, and the terror I felt never subsided when I tried to check to see if it was wrong. I could barely move from his bed, remembering how he told me, "If you ever are scared, imagine a circle of light protecting you from all the bad things." I sat, and I imagined, and I hoped, and I prayed. Nothing got better. There was a symphony of screams and shattered glass, and the imaginary circle did nothing tease my worries. My heart rate spiked as another shattered picture frame hits the floor, and I try to remember his voice, his smile, and the comfort he always gave me. "Strength in numbers," he swore. Now there's barely strength in me. The jokes we made as kids seemed terrifyingly real as another photo slammed to the ground, thoughts of zombies, ghosts, and aliens clouding my mind. I didn't even notice when the hellish symphony finally quieted, as if the entire house was taking a deep breath. Someone was there, in front of me, hiding from my sight. "I'm sorry," I cry to the unknown object, begging for forgiveness and mercy. "I don't want to die." Memories of my brother's death flashed in my mind, his screams, the blood, and the demonic laugh that echoed throughout the empty room. My body rocked back and forth while I clutched my hair, almost trying to tear it from its roots. "Silly," my brother's voice echoed out, and I froze in terror at the familiar voice I had last heard screaming. "You're safe as long as you stay in the circle." He laughed lightly, but his normally happy voice deepened to a demonic level before snapping back to the normal boyish chuckle. Besides, I could never hurt you. He raises his left hand, and I noticed how horribly mutilated his left arm was. His palm gently pressed against a dome that surrounded me from the imaginary surface, and he smiled. We used to joke about all the bad things here, but don't worry. They can't hurt you as long as I'm around. He smiled gently, and I knew that I was going to be all right. It was some twisted story of an angel, but I knew that I would be safe as long as my twisted guardian angel was watching over me. Lenny didn't know how old he was. I mean, he knew how old he was when he died, 18, but he wasn't sure just how long he had been dead. There were clues, for example. He had been killed by a horse-drawn carriage, and the house he currently lived in had a 72-inch flat-screen television, so he had to be pretty damn old. You see, Lenny is a ghost, and it turns out most people don't know very much about ghosts. They think they do, but all they know is what they see in horror movies, and almost none of that stuff is true. What is true is they like to stay where they are, and for the most part they really don't want any trouble. There are a few bad apples who get into the whole haunting thing, but Lenny, like most ghosts, just wanted to live in secret. He was never into bothering the humans in his house, and he would spend his days watching his co-inhabitants like they were characters in a soap opera. He also enjoyed the special connection he had with the family dogs. You see, dogs can see ghosts plain as day. The interactions between ghosts and dogs tend to fill the void a ghost feels after death, and the dogs seem to like it too. Whenever you see a dog barking at nothing in particular, he's probably just carrying on a conversation with the specter of the house. Lenny had been living in the house on Elm Street since the day he died. Well, technically he had lived there 18 years longer because he lived there alive before he lived there dead. It's a little complicated, but I think you get the idea, and the important thing is everything was going along swimmingly until the Johnsons moved in. The Johnson family consisted of Roger and Mary and their daughter Anna. They also had a mutt named Baxter, who loved nothing more than to dig in the dirt and bark at Lenny. Lenny, of course, couldn't care less about the digging. Ghosts really have no opinion one way or another when it comes to holes, and he loved the boisterous Baxter because he was always up for a talk. For the first few years after the Johnsons moved in, Lenny was as happy as he had ever been since he died. The Johnsons were a nice family, and Anna, who had been 15 when they first moved in, had grown into a beautiful young lady of 17. In all his years dead, Lenny had never done anything to announce his presence in the home. He saw no upside. He loved his people, so he didn't want to scare them, and it was a pretty solid fact that humans don't like ghosts. I mean, they liked Casper, but Casper wasn't a real ghost. He was just a cartoon. Cartoons are another source of false myths about ghosts, but that's really off topic right now. The important thing was Lenny's desire to remain secret changed because of Anna. Lenny had been killed when he was on his way to his very first date. He had asked one of the young ladies in the village to accompany him to a Friday night dance, but he never made it to his destination. As a result, he had never found love. Not the kind of love a young man feels for a young woman, and his ghost heart was falling hard for Anna. Now, Lenny was a realistic ghost. He knew they could never be together, but he was finding it increasingly hard not to at least talk to Anna. In reality, that's not as hard as you might expect. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort for a ghost to make themselves known. This is a common misconception perpetuated by the movie Ghost. Lenny didn't have to take over Whoopi Goldberg's body to communicate with Anna. He just had to talk to her. There was one problem with this plan, though. She could hear him, but she could not see him. It's hard enough to get a girl to like you when you are a handsome devil. It's nearly impossible when you are an invisible ghost. Lenny didn't care, though. He was going to take his chance. In the 2 years the Johnsons had lived in Lenny's home, he had never entered Anna's room while she was alone. He wasn't an officer and a gentleman, but he was a ghost and a gentleman. He had been in her room plenty of times when Roger or Mary or both had been there, but he always left when they did. But not tonight. Lenny's plan was, well, he didn't actually have a plan. I mean, he was a ghost about to talk to a human for the first time. What could go wrong? When it came time for Anna to go to bed, Lenny and Baxter headed to Anna's room and sat together in Anna's wingback chair. In case you didn't know, ghosts can sit. They are basically like us, except they can fly and walk through walls, so maybe they are not as much like us as you would think. From the chair and with Baxter by his side, Lenny spoke for the first time in what had to be 100 years. "Hello." It seemed like a good way to start the conversation. "My name is Lenny, and I'm a ghost who lives in this house with you." You have to admit, Lenny wasn't one to mince words. He just came right out and announced himself. To his shock and amazement, Anna responded calmly. "Hi, I'm Anna. It's nice to finally meet you." You see, unbeknownst to Lenny, the Johnsons were a family of psychics and had known there was a presence in the house from the first day they moved in. They left Lenny alone because they didn't want to scare him away. They knew about dogs and ghosts and figured Baxter could use the friend. From that day forward, Lenny became a secret part of the family. He would join them for movie nights and would even play Monopoly. He was always the top hat. Lenny never told Anna how he felt, but she kind of knew, and in her own way she liked him too. It was a relationship never meant to be, but there was some there. The happy family dynamic continued for almost a year, but alas, all good things must come to an end. Near the end of Anna's junior year in high school, a priest moved into the home next door. Ironically, this wasn't just any priest. This priest specialized in exorcism. I would say it goes without saying that the worst neighbor a ghost could have is an exorcist, but wouldn't that be some sort of oxymoron? Anyway, with this new neighbor now totally moved in, the Johnson secret went from minor to major. Something had to be done. Through casual conversation with the priest, the Johnsons found out the problem was only a temporary one. The priest was there for a single year, helping with the local parish. There had been rumors of evil spirits in the town, but that was just a rumor. Bottom line, he was only there for a year and would then move back to Vatican City and out of the Johnsons' life. To keep Lenny safe, it was decided that Anna and Lenny would go to a boarding school a few hours away, where both could live safely and return when the priest had moved out. Anna was excited to have a chance to spread her wings and try adulting. Lenny was excited because the boarding school was located in an old Gothic manor, and what ghost doesn't dream of getting to vacation at a Gothic manor? The year at boarding school was everything Anna and Lenny could have hoped for, and with the extended time alone, the two became closer by the day. Anna would spend her days in class while Lenny would explore the manor. As I said before, this is one of the myths about ghosts that is actually quite true. They love to live in old, dark Gothic manors. It's kind of like the beach for surfers or the mountains for people who like mountains. Bottom line, they both loved their new digs. Each night Anna would use her mother's old coffee pot and the hot plate provided by the school to make a cup of coffee, and with Lenny for company, she would do her homework. Since writers have been writing, there have been stories of lovers who can never be together for one reason or another. Romeo and Juliet, Scarlett and Ashley, Wesley and Buttercup. It's a tale as old as time, and there are very few things more difficult to overcome than love between one who is alive and another who is not. As the final semester worked its way towards a close, Anna and Lenny added their names to the list of great unrequited love stories. And then came the fire. One of the truisms we should all know about Gothic manors is they are all tinderboxes. Everything in them is flammable, and a single spark can destroy a manor in the blink of an eye. It is also true that an old hot plate with fraying wires can easily provide the necessary spark. Unfortunately, that is exactly what happened. Anna was pulling an all-nighter getting ready for her last final. Last final? Is that some sort of weird redundancy? And as is the case with most teenagers these days, she used coffee to get her through the night. She turned on the burner, put a pot on to boil, and sat back down at her desk to study. She didn't see the spark. She didn't notice it falling on the paper towel next to the pot. She didn't see the flame until it was too late. By the time she looked up from her book, it had engulfed the counter and was making its way towards the only door out of her third-story room. There was no way out. She was trapped. This brings us to our last fun fact about ghosts. They can die. A ghost has the ability to reanimate for a few short minutes, but the stress of the act snuffs their spirit out forever. It's not a very well-known fact because in the history of the world, only a few ghosts have ever actually used this power. Tonight would be another example. Lenny loved being a ghost. He had loved being part of family after family and getting to know hundreds of dogs, but he had never been in love until now, and he couldn't let Anna die. In a moment of true, enduring, and endless love, he came back to life, scooped up Anna in his arms, and raced through the flames, bringing his love to the safety of the front courtyard. For the first time, Anna was able to see Lenny, and she grabbed him and held him tight. She then kissed him like he'd never been kissed before and professed her love to him. She had no idea how he had become real, but she was thrilled to finally be able to touch him. Her joy, however, was short-lived, as Lenny explained to her the terrible consequences of his decision. Anna broke down in tears and asked, "How long do we have?" 5 minutes at most, came his heartbreaking response. The words stabbed her in the heart like a knife. She had known she could never really be with Lenny, but she expected he would always be there to look over her. Now that lifetime of time was reduced to a cruel 5 minutes. Wanting to savor every second of time they had left, the two star-crossed lovers sat down, held hands, and stared into each other's eyes. Anna wanted to memorize everything about Lenny's face, and Lenny wanted to feel Anna's touch for as long as possible. When a ghost dies, they start to fade away like a fog. It happens slowly, until they are just no more. This is exactly what happened to Lenny. Little by little, his face began to fade, and the feel of his hands on Anna's left as well. As the last bits of him faded away, Anna heard Lenny's voice one last time. "I love you, my love, more than death itself." And with that, he was gone. Anna never saw or heard another ghost. She did eventually find love and start a family. Her husband was a good man, and the pair had one child, a son she named Lenny. Lenny was a secret reminder of her first love and her first kiss, and if she looked really hard, she was sure she saw her other Lenny in his eyes. The screams just won't stop. Every night I hear them, echoing through the dark hallways of our house. Shuddering, I huddle into a corner, hoping that someone would hear them and send help. But I think that is too much to ask. Nobody has come before as well. Our house is on a hill, overlooking a village. Tonight, the bright moon shines a shimmering blanket over us, but there is not a soul outside. Wait, is that a door creaking open? I pull back into a corner of the bed, eyes fixed at the door as it slowly opens. A little girl in a white frock enters. Deep channels of tears mar her cherubic face, and in the pale moonlight, I see a few drops of ruby red on one side of her lips. She sits down on the bed, burying her face in her hands. A part of me is swamped with pity, but another is too scared to move. Just then, the half-open door bangs open, and a huge figure sways in. It is a burly man with a half-broken bottle of wine? Even in the din, I can make out the sheer drunken frenzy on his face. Before I can react, he bellows, "It's your fault! You are the reason why she left me. Had you not been born, there would not have been any problem." Then he strikes the poor girl. Instantly I spring from the bed and lunge at him, but he phases through me. I yell and run for my mother as the screams begin once again. My mother is seated in the hall in her favorite chair, looking over the gloomy expanse of sloping houses beneath us. I jolt her from her trance and tell her about what is going on in the room. She smiles and replies, "Son, don't make up stories. You and I both know that ghosts don't exist." But I know they do. What about those people in my room? That little girl? That obnoxious excuse for a man? What about me phasing through them? This isn't the first time it has happened. I have tried telling my mother this many times, that we must leave the house at once, but she just smiles and shakes her head. Even the villagers are of no help. Whenever I try asking them something, they pretend not to notice me. Hardly anyone comes up to our house, and ones who do, the milkman and the postman, they seem to be very eager to leave as fast as their legs will carry them. After many attempts, I managed to eavesdrop some information. Apparently this house, or hilltop as it was called then, was owned by a wealthy country squire some 100 years ago. Pretty mundane name. The squire had a wife and a child, but nobody remembers the gender now. The squire was adored by friends and family alike. He was kind to everyone and had a unique way of leaving people in smiles after every conversation. This was until he met a certain woman at the tavern one night. Completely enamored by her, the squire started a radical descent into misery. He began neglecting his family in favor of spending more time at the tavern. Stories of late-night dalliances and dishonorable conduct started spreading, but when they reached the wife, she refused to believe any of them. Until one day, she disappeared. Nobody knows what happened, and when they asked the squire, he responded with rage that his wife had gone to meet her parents. Gone was the cheery lord of Hilltop. What stood before them was a man so consumed by the fires of lust and liquor that he did not care about right or wrong anymore. The prolonged absence of the lady raised several eyebrows, and eventually rumors of her never having left the house made the rounds. All of this was too much for the mistress of the squire. Tired of being the target of public disapproval and refusing to commit to the squire because of his child, she decided to end things with him. Apparently, he did not take this well. There are accounts of him going down on his knees, begging her not to leave him. But she did, and rightly so. Soon after, the squire stopped coming to the village often. The few times he did, it was to buy alcohol, food, and other provisions. Any attempts at exchanging pleasantries with him were met with so fierce a scowl that people started avoiding him like the plague. The child wasn't seen in the village ever again. One clear winter night, when the first flakes of snow floated down from the sky, a loud sound was heard emanating from Hilltop. The villagers gathered the courage to go up the next morning, finally having enough of the squire. The house was locked, and after breaking in, the villagers were hit by waves of musty and stale air. After a lot of searching, they reached the cellar. The great stone door of the cellar was jammed shut, but a trickle of red coming out of the crack between the door and the floor alarmed the villagers. After a lot of struggle, they managed to push the door open, and the sight that awaited them was burned in their sights for all eternity. Inside, in a pool of his own blood, lay the body of the unfortunate squire. The fingers of his right hand still gripped a shotgun, and fragments of a shattered wine glass lay nearby. In one corner of the cellar was a shovel, its end still muddy. This roused the suspicion of the villagers who dug up the garden. There lay two bodies, one of a boy, still freshly buried, and the other of a woman that had already started decomposing. Following this, a shroud of fear descended upon the village. Many residents started leaving, under the pretext of finding better jobs in the city. Hilltop was rented by many families over the century, but they always ended up leaving almost immediately, citing strange occurrences. I sit outside the house, the mark on my neck still aching. Inside, the poor girl still screams, and I wish I could help her. They say, history repeats itself. And this is one of the times I hope it doesn't. I wish I could touch that man, but I can't do much if everybody seems to ignore me.